Hi, and welcome to Walking the Virtual Dog. I'm your host, Rick Grant. This is the show where we relax a moment, take our virtual dogs for a walk so we can contemplate the changes we're seeing in the IT industry, but do it through the lens of the industry's analysts. Now, to make sense of all that, we turn to our veteran analyst relations practitioner, Thomas Ward Lynch, who joins us now. Thomas, good to see
Well,
you.
good to see you too. Good to see everyone. Well, Rick, we always look for dramatic changes in the industry because that gives an indication of a huge shift in terms of buying or buying habits. And right now, whenever the analyst weighed in on what happened in the first quarter of this year, and these reports started coming out in April, it was clear that things are afoot. Things are changing. There is definitely a big shift in the market. So this segment, we're going to concentrate on what is probably one of the most boring aspects of the industry, but it's also part of IT for everyone, and that is PCs and workstations. It turns out the devices have gone through some major shifts, and the analysts are weighing in on how and why this has happened. Now, we're not talking about a small shift of 5% or 3%. No, we're talking about shifts in some countries as much as 30%. So let's take a look at the first chart. This is from IDC, and we'll just kind of go through and give context to this, if you don't mind. I think
Yeah,
that's
because 30%, that's pretty significant, Thomas.
right. And we're going country by country. So this is an EMEA chart, right? So this is, of course, we're looking at Europe and European markets. Now, I'm going to show you some very widely circulated analyst quotes that went around the world because we're following about 2,500 analysts, and to say the least, not all of them are following PC volume, but they certainly are quite a few in not only IDC but also in Gartner and other analyst firms. We're going to talk about those quotes in a moment. And they are explaining and talking about the fact that it does have a lot to do with, economic issues and so forth that's going around the world, right? We have a war in the Ukraine. We've got a considerable amount of inflationary issues and so forth. So we saw an immediate drop. But let's take a look at this chart for a minute to see if we can come up with some context for the changes. If you look back to 2020, where were we in 2020? We were all at home. We were all working from home. We didn't go into the office. We didn't turn on workstations in the office. We didn't check out most of the devices that allow us to access the internet in terms of what was at the office and so forth. So the infrastructure stopped. I mean, completely. There was no buy whatsoever. So if you look at these numbers, they were definitely showing a complete downturn in 2020. Well, what happened in 2021? We started going back to work. We started going back to the office. Now we're in the middle of this debate, right? Do we go to the office? Do we stay at home? Go to the office? Do we stay at home? But regardless, people went back to the office, turned on a lot of those machines, and they didn't come on. So they started a replacement process. So if you look at 2022, everything was still, fairly much on an increase, and it was a return to healthy growth. And then you look at the second half of 2022, and we're kind of in that same spot in the first quarter or first half of 2023. So the projection is we're going to continue to see that slump until the end of the first half of 2023. Then we're going to see a slight recovery. At that point, by the time that we get into the second half of this year, we should be on that end of life planned obsolescence cycle that IT budgets are designed for. So it's like after so many years, you replace so many laptops, you replace so many PCs and workstations, and we're used to that kind of volume and that kind of change. Now, of course, we're looking at EMEA. The reports vary a little bit country to country. And as you can imagine, what country would not be on this list at all? China, right? Because China stayed locked down for the longest time. And as a result, they're just now picking back up in terms of their volumes. So that's what this chart is really showing. Now let's switch charts for just a second, and I'll show a widely adopted and widely used quote in circulation. And again, this is part of the explanation. Absolutely. It's not just about the pandemic, and it's not just about the timeline. It's about inflation. It's about economic issues, economic concerns, uncertainties that we're all feeling right now. We may not be experiencing it, but we're definitely feeling it. So this particular quote I've seen literally all over the presses, and I happen to take this quote out of iConnect 007, which is the uncertainty surrounding the advent of the war in Europe, energy crisis, and inflation weighed heavily on corporate hardware investment choices and negatively impacted demand. Maintenance and support contracts cannot postpone the refreshment cycle of aging workstations by another year. So in other words, we're kind of stretching the rubber band at this point. And as Mohammed Hefni points out, we're almost to a breaking point. We can't go any further. So we'll start to see that investment back into the commodity issues of PCs and workstations. It's like I said, it's one of the most interesting thing to watch, because if it goes down, what's happening with the rest of the industry, right? Now, a lot of industry analysts weighed in on this, IT analysts weighed in on it. So if you take a look at the second page, you'll see all kinds of quotes from IDC, Canalys, and also Fox Advisors. Let's start with the top one, which was from Sean Dewitt of Canalys. Most of the issues that plagued the industry in the second half of last year have extended into the start of 2023. Demand across all customer segments remains dampened, with more pressure arising from future interest rate increases in US, Europe, and other markets, where reducing inflation is a top priority. IDC expects a market rebound later in the year. And again, Lin Hang from IDC, by 2024, an aging install base will start coming up for refresh. If the economy is trending upwards by then, we expect significant market upside as consumers look to refresh, schools seek to replace worn down Chromebooks, and businesses move on to Windows 11. So not only are we talking about the workstations for workplace, but we're also talking about the entirety of the market. Looking a little bit further with Canalys, the PC market has strong fundamentals to drive long-term growth, with shipment volumes higher than the pre-pandemic era, a much larger install base post-COVID. So in other words, the market for PCs and so forth is actually growing. I think that has a lot to do with the fact, Rick, that, really we're looking at an environment right now where now this is how we get things done. This is how we go to school. This is how we communicate with our relatives and our friends. We use our PCs or we use our workstation, and we're sharing a lot of data at the same time. We're talking, we're doing video, but we're also sharing decks, PowerPoints and slides and photos and everything else. So those are some of the things that we need. Taking a look at the last piece, and I do want to include Stephen Fox in this, because I kind of think he provides a little bit of reasoning to, and like I'm kind of reminded of Kevin Bacon in that movie Animal House, whenever he's standing there and he says, all is well, remain calm, right? Just calm down, everybody. Just because there's the 30% drop doesn't mean that we're in trouble. Doesn't mean that the industry is going flat, and it's not. There's a lot of evidence to prove that. The evidence doesn't seem to support the idea that recovery is going to happen. We're not looking at a crash in demand from here. We're saying things are sluggish and they're going to stay that way for a little while. And that's Stephen Fox from Fox Advisors. So here we are with a very big decrease worldwide on PC volumes, workstation volumes. And the big question is, well, what does that mean? If it's not an alarm that's being set off by the analyst community, what does it mean? Where are we going, and what do we find it's going to happen next, right?
Well, it's an excellent question, Thomas, because those numbers are fairly dramatic.
Well, here's
right?
what I can say. We're tracking over 2,500 analysts worldwide. I have seen absolutely no indication that the overall budget and the overall spend of IT data centers around the world are going down. Now, some might be decreasing and some might be increasing, but overall, the increase is there. So here's the thing. They're not spending it on PCs. We'll tell you what they're spending their money on, because it's not going away. In fact, it's increasing.
All right. So you're going to give us a cliffhanger there, Thomas, aren't you? You're going to make us wait.
I'm going to make you wait for the next segment. We're going to go into a couple more quotes from some really insightful research that's starting to show us where the money is actually going to be spent for the rest of the year, and how that money is going to be spent in what channel. So there's a lot to cover.
Well, I'm looking forward to it, and I hope you'll join us next time on Walking the Virtual Dog.
Thank you, Rick.